basically it makes it sound a bit like combat. But as you can see, no one's really all that concerned about it. Everybody's sort of chill about it. Really all this, the way this works out, they've been doing this class called critique for a long time, where they critique their work. This is a bit more of a formal version of critique, where they give it, their work. It's the best you'll ever see your work, is when it's got spotlights on it. It's in this great, beautiful gallery, So this is probably the best critique of the year, of your time here, hopefully. So they each have got a certain amount of time they're going to present, and then we'll do questions after each one. It's really up to you guys how many questions you want to take. Also the timing, I mean, this is a little bit unusual because normally we have a separate art reception when we do these. We didn't even get to do one last year, obviously, because COVID ruined everything. So we're doing a kind of combined senior defense plus reception, but we can't have food out here, so the food is outside of Einstein's. I'm not even sure where they set it up. Our remarks set it up. Apparently there's individually wrapped cupcakes, so that's following COVID rules, and lemonade. So after they get done talking, there'll be time to mill about and talk to them individually, look at work closer, go out and have a snack when you want to. It's kind of weird to have these things so far separated out. I said that this part of it lasts until about 2:45, but it's okay with me if it goes over. We do have to follow some COVID rules, which is 12 people in here. And we're really close to that. I'm just going to step out and stand in the doorway. I think Stacy is too, and I think that'll get us at our 12 limit. And then there's a limit of 25 people in the lobby, so as many people shows up, fits out there, we'll be fine. So if you guys are done at 2:45, that's fine. We're actually starting a little bit late, so you can go long if you want to. It's up to you. But they've done a great talk at OFTA. Some of you might have seen that, might have attended that. I think you guys are going to follow a similar format, except you've got the real art here to talk about it. So that'll work out. But I'll just turn this over to you guys. You can go into whatever you want to.
Okay, cool. Hi, everyone. I'm Miranda. First and foremost, I want to just thank everyone for coming here. It means a lot to Ryan, Rebecca, and I that we were able to make this happen. And we're very excited to be able to share our artwork with you here today. So my contribution to this exhibition was all of the oil paints on the walls. And I figured I'll just walk around the exhibition, talk to you about a few of them. And I'm going to start with my tarot card paintings over here. These paintings are what I came into this first semester senior year doing. I took one of my very best friends, Brittany Lira and Julio Neri, and I read their tarot cards. I took their reading and then symbolically painted it. These paintings actually had a big influence on how I decided to roll with the rest of my paintings and critique through like the portraiture and the symbolism. One of the biggest pieces that I had done is actually the butterfly piece over there. And that one has probably the most symbolism without portraiture in it that I've done so far. The next pieces I'm going to talk to you about are pieces that came about through some like emotional times in my life. The first point was actually over winter break, where I found out that my family was moving to Texas from California. And so I started to feel very nostalgic, and I did a series of 3 paintings. One of them's in this video right now, but the other 2 are this beach painting called Cambria Escape, and then the campfire painting over there called Morning Campfires. And these paintings here, they were a way for me to bring a piece of California with me to wherever I would go. This beach painting was a painting I did from memory of my favorite beach. It's not like the typical California beach with the warm white sand. It's rocky and stormy there most of the time. And I think that's what I liked most about it, was that it was different from everything else. And so that's why I decided to paint this one. And then the campfire one reminds me of wanted it to feel warm and like the fire was glowing, because I remember waking up at like 7 in the morning. My dad was the only one up. He had a fire going already, and so we would just sit there, stare at the fire in silence, and be in this like pale blue sky morning, and then the fire was just really big to me, and it was warm. So I wanted to be able to depict that in that way. The next paintings I'm going to be talking to you about are the croc and the water polo ball, and then the hip, and the painting titled Casting Away, with the girl pushing the boat out in the water. The croc came about from, so my swim coach, Coach Burek, he, as many of you guys know, passed away over winter break due to COVID, and he was like a second father to me. I had always planned on giving him the senior honor token, and so since I was unable to do that, I decided to put it right next to the painting until I can give it to his family after the exhibition. But with the painting, he was known for wearing his bright yellow crocs, and he was always a very big personality. He was always laughing, joking around. You could hear his voice 3 blocks down the road. But so when I was thinking of ways to paint the croc, I wanted to show that vibrancy that I'm reminded of when I think of him. So I have a choice between a yellow to green color scheme and a yellow to red color scheme. And none of those seemed to do the trick for me, so I decided to combine the two and kind of throw both the red yellows and the green yellows in there as a way to show like how colorful he really was and what he meant to me. Moving on, the water polo painting is just a still life that I did of a water polo ball and a water polo cap. This painting I did once I found out I had to have hip surgery and I wouldn't be able to play my final senior year of water polo or swim. So it was me kind of coming to terms with the fact that I wasn't able to do that anymore and that I needed to let that go. So for me, it was the placement of the cap felt somber to me and just put on a shelf and to be put away and not used anymore. So moving on to these 2 paintings over here. As I mentioned earlier, I had to have hip surgery over winter break, and so I decided to paint my feelings towards that. I was initially very angry towards my hip, just my body, for I would say giving up on me, but that's not really how that works. So I decided to paint small termite holes on the hip bone, or the parts of the hip where I was affected. And so that was just something disgusting to me, and it mimicked my initial reaction to having to get hip surgery. I also wanted to add in a lot of deep, rich reds and colors in there to mimic the emotion that I had towards this event. This next piece over here, called Casting Away, was my response piece to the 3 pieces I had just talked about and dealing with loss. It was a loss of a coach, a loss of a season, a loss of a working him, I guess. But to me, this piece was encompassing like accepting your loss, realizing where you're at in the moment, and then releasing it back out so you're not stewing on it anymore. I wanted the flame and the candle to be the one bright thing with the warm colors. And I wanted it to reflect off of her hand and up her sleeve and onto her face and chest to mimic a sense of hope, almost, in that light. The next piece I'm going to talk about is actually this painting over here I did of my mother. She personally does not like it because it shows off her wrinkles, and she likes to think she has no wrinkles. But anyways, this painting came about through a contemporary art assignment where we had to share the style of a famous contemporary artist. My artist that I chose was Lucian Freud, and I think that it actually helped me with my painting a lot because he used a lot of texture and he didn't draw anything out, and I'm very used to drawing things out first before I start painting. And you can ask Rebecca and Ryan, I kind of freaked out a little bit before I started going for it, but through this piece I learned a lot about how to use different colors and realizing that shading isn't always gray. It taught me to use different colors in my shadings, like the blues, the purples, sometimes like deeper browns will help that. And then adding in extra color to the face to add emphasis on the highlights. And I think using that, taking that idea, you can see it in a lot of the other paintings that I just talked about, with the texture and the paint and the different colors that I had thrown in there. I think that they all add to my emotional reaction to what had happened, and then they add emotional depth into the painting. And so that concludes my artist talk, and I now open for questions. I think that's what we're doing. Yeah.
Would you talk a little bit about your relationship or your process of working from photographs? Because I know that that is part of what you do. So if I'm thinking about taking photographs or selecting which photographs to work from, and just sort of how much are you pre-visualizing the painting as you're developing and finding the photographs? What is that kind of back and forth between that source image and the final painting?
Yeah. So I'll just talk about this through the tarot card paintings because I had to get a lot of source imagery in order to correctly portray Julio and Brittany. But I initially start with an idea and I kind of draw out where I want things to go, and then I will develop an image after that. Like if I need to go out and take a picture, then I will. And they were very helpful in having me take the pictures of them. I do like to have my own touch into it, so I don't like to go on Google and just search up a picture of a heart, but I can't really go and dissect somebody and find another picture of a heart. But yeah, so I like to take pictures myself if I'm ever working from an image. But I developed the setup of that photograph from a sketch that I had previously done.
Thank you.
Why the choice of using oil paint or not acrylic or watercolor? What draws you to oil?
Oh goodness. Okay. So I was actually initially a watercolor painter coming into college, but I kind of, with oil paint, it was easier for me to work with than acrylic. Acrylic dries faster than oil paint, so I felt like I had more leeway. And I don't really know how else to describe it besides personal preference of the way the paint feels when you're painting it across a canvas. I think the colors blend better, at least for me, they blend better than acrylics. And I'd done watercolor for so long that I was like, I'm actually enjoying doing oil paintings. So that was my decision for oil painting.
Miranda, I loved your description of your of the Coach Burke painting there. Can you talk about your decision to have a real close-up of the croc instead of maybe a pair of crocs or, you know, further away?
Yeah, I wanted that piece to be more dynamic than just a normal still life of a croc. Because I play with it a bunch between it being a horizontal layout or having it farther away, closer up to, it was a lot. And I wanted it to feel like you got the idea that it was a croc without the front and the end, and I wanted it to be more dynamic. And so I felt like that layout was what accomplished it.
Thank you.
Stacy?
Do you think, Miranda, you know, when I look at the paintings, some of them are, you know, really kind of tight, you know, like the brush stroke is tight, you know, and they're almost like hyper-realism sort of thing. And then you have some, you know, that are this kind of looser, more abstract. I mean, how do you make the decision when something's going to be tight and something's going to be a little bit looser?
Mm-hmm. Personally, some of the tighter paintings or paintings that I had done a while ago, they're some of my earlier works, and I like the cleanness of it, and that's initially what I strove for. But I felt more free, and I felt like I was able to pour my own emotion into the painting more by making it a looser stroke rather than a tight stroke. Yeah, I just think it adds more emotion into it, and it helps me on a different level because I use painting as a therapeutic thing. So it helps me to be able to just to whip the paintbrush and just whip away my problems, if that makes sense.
And I don't know which one of your paintings is the last one that you did, but the crow that painting seems to kind of capture both things, the kind of tightness, the control that you have, and also this more kind of expressive thing. I think that's a really fabulous painting. It's really impressive.
If there are no more questions, I think I will hand it off to Rebecca or Ryan.
Okay, so I'll be going next. Thank you, Miranda. Again, I'd like to reiterate the sentiment of thank you all for coming and seeing the show. I hope we put it together well enough for you all. So throughout my 4 years here, I kind of started as a realistic artist. I had every intention of coming in, doing charcoal and pencil, graphite, anything you think of, make it as realistic as possible. As you can see, my 3 ink pieces, my hanging installation piece, and my cat's not very realistic. I kind of changed my idea as things went on, and honestly, the culmination, it changed through senior year primarily. Starting with the ink pieces here, I drew an inspiration from contemporary art class as well. We had to do our project based on an artist, and the artist I chose was Jennifer Bartlett. Now, she's primarily known for making 12-inch by 12-inch pieces of steel cut squares, and then putting enamel paint on them, and then like baking them, and then hanging them up massively across an entire gallery space. And I decided I wanted to try my hand at that, except choosing a slightly different medium, one that I felt more comfortable with, as well as one that is more down my alley and what I enjoy. So the first middle piece here is the first piece I did with it, called Deceptive Chaos, and I chose to do India ink with black batting on the back, all 6 inches by 6 inches, taking about half the scope of it, and taking the entire semester to make this look whole and unified, I guess. She's also known for having high contrast and shapes in her work that seem to have this sense of flow and movement. And I really connected with that as I had like throughout from like junior year to senior year, I had taken this time where I like to make shapes show movement through either falling, like pushing to the left or pushing to the right, and stuff like that. So that one I felt culminated all of that together. The one on the left is the next one that I did. I changed the ink I used to acrylic ink to have more of a colorful outlook, as I am also a very colorful person, so I tried to break into the colorful realm of things, and then same with over here, did that. Those two happened this semester. That was for the first critique, this was for the second critique, and just threw them all together and displayed them. I chose for the middle piece here to have a little piece of it taken out, because she seemed to have this emphasis on what is lacking and what remains in a piece, and what is necessary for your eye to see as a whole. But then the top is very rambunctious and like packed in. So in conclusion, I just kind of went for it. Speaking for all of the multiple pieces themselves, Stacy's class, Multiples in Installation, really got me into this idea of what it is to create something that has tiny pieces that would come together and unify. And throughout that, I really enjoyed making something that is this process that where you start from a sketch, you lay it all out, you think how it's going to work through, and then for the black and white piece specifically, I didn't have all of it laying out together at one time until it was hanging on the wall. And that I thought was really difficult to discern how I was going to space things and how it was going to lay in the final product. From that, I kind of learned that I should probably have it all laying out. So the next two, I had them all laying out as I went about etching and sketching through them. So a lot of planning and processing with these three. Moving over to the origami pieces themselves, I again was inspired by Stacy's installation and multiples class. The final project was to make a quilt-like piece, and to her, as we were explaining it in class as well as over Zoom when we went home, we had to discuss what a quilt symbolizes, how it functions, what it means. And quilts are generally a legacy, a story, something that's passed down from generation to generation. And I've been drawn to making tiny origami pieces forever. I started freshman year making cranes, hanging them from my room, and then sophomore year, cranes hanging from the art building. Junior year, cranes hanging from the art building as an installation of my brother. And I wanted to try a different approach to the origami, so I used what is called a chrysanthemum to display these. I start off with a 2-inch by 2-inch square, fold it down, so then each one of these is about 1 inch by 1 inch. And from there, I just kind of move into the planning or the process of it, which is, again, strenuous and a lot. So I start with a picture that I would like to represent the image that I'm going for. The images I choose, like the faces from the figgy back there, as well as this bridge scene, they come from my life as well as like family members and things like that. I choose them as like a snapshot into my life, not meant to be there forever. I haven't actually visited this place in probably 3 years. So like, it's kind of just used to represent who I am, tell my story a little bit, but also in a fun way. So after I find the image that I'm looking for, I then transfer it into a software that pixelates the image, and from there I take each one of those little pixelated pieces and convert it into a chrysanthemum piece itself. This one has 60 going across and then 40 down. So altogether it's 2,400 pieces, which is, again, a lot of time. And then from there I make all the pieces, and then I begin laying them out and figure out how they need to go. And then I string them up using fishing line and beads to hold them together at the bottom so that they don't fall off. But I kind of like, since I like origami, I like the idea of what it means to be a quilt. I was trying to figure out how I could use the origami with the quilt making, and I enjoy this idea of non-permanence and what it means to not be permanent in this world. So I don't expect this to last a legacy. I don't expect this to go down to even the next generation, because it is paper, it's so thin, it's not gonna last forever. So I just kind of I like playing with that idea, because I had someone ask me a little while back, what are you gonna do with these pieces? They're not gonna survive anything. But that's the point. Why does it matter? It's here right now, so. And then moving on to my third set that I have here, these are digitally printed cats, and individually glazed for funny designs and different intentions. But the project started working for the Warren County Achievers, helping volunteer with Warren County Achievers in the ceramics lab. We make little ceramic, we have ceramic days with them where we make, one guy made a hot dog, one lady made a cat, stuff like that. You just sit down and they play with them. And the next time I saw one of them, she's like, I broke my cat. I was like, oh no. I was like, I have a 3D printer, why don't I just make a bunch of cats for them? Due to COVID, I lost touch again, so I decided just to continue making them and see what happens from there. And Stacy and Janice convinced me that I needed to make a million more. Only 240, but so then I made a bunch of them, and then came the problem of how to display them in a way that would represent them and hold the weight of 240 cats. And they all thought I was crazy for trying to make something that is a vertical stand and still have them compartmentalized in a way that feels like a me move. So in order to do this, I made shelving units up high. Ryan and Miranda helped me build it. It was a struggle, but we got there. And from there, I had to organize the cats. There are 120 red and yellow cats. And I organized the yellows in, on this side we have more of a V pattern, and then the red cats kind of follow the same pattern. And then over here, it's an X into an X on the top. And I use that as a way to represent a different pattern and structure. And the goal of this piece was to have people take them from the show. As you can see, there's some holes already. The goal was to have people take the pieces away, again playing on this idea of non-permanence, what it means to change, how do you change, and ceramic pieces are more forever than paper, so how do you make them disappear? So I made individual viewers make them disappear. And the end result was going to be more where, as they're taken away, that pattern shows through more. And all that good jazz. And thank you. I don't have anything else. Any questions? Yeah?
How long does it take to print a cat?
Would you like the approximate or the actual?
The actual approximate.
About 11 minutes and 53 seconds. She's gonna have to science.
So you didn't talk too much or spend much time talking about your other major, which is math.
Oh yeah.
And, can you talk about how that influences your work?
Yes. Being a math major, taking geometry class with Professor Yuri, stuff like that, I learned I like shapes, I like the way they move. How can they change a space? With the ink pieces, that's what I did there. My math here comes in, basic math, I guess, algebra, trying to figure out how I want them to be displayed, the amount of space they're going to take up in the end, and the piece-by-piece function of them. Here, math, again, basic, more basic math, like how is this going to be utilized, and how heavy is it going to be, how many pieces are going to hold it up in the structure of it. Right there. And the multiples, I just kind of like counting numbers, so did a lot of counting.
Rebecca, I have a question.
Yes.
Observation question. So I'm curious about, I know that these are extremely well planned, and they need to be because of all the math and the pieces that go into it. But I'm also curious about the role of spontaneity in your work, and how much of that do you allow, like what is spontaneous and what is planned, I guess? Because I see elements of both in your work, and I'm just curious about your response to the spontaneity versus.
Yeah. Generally speaking, we can take this cat example here. I start with a basic structure. I want the reds and the yellows to go a specific spot. The rest of them are more unique cats. They have different glazes on them. I don't necessarily know what I want to glaze them. I've had friends help me glaze them, so I don't know how that's going to turn out. And then I just kind of put them up in no particular order from there. In terms of the origami piece here, the spontaneous action was, instead of stringing, I strung all of them vertically together. But instead of going all horizontally, I did one, skipped 2 rows, did another row, skipped 2, and then same on throughout. And with that, I felt it gave the piece more motion and more freedom to like move and flow. As like, if you touch it and it moves, it changes the way it's seen throughout. And I like that spontaneousness of it. Along with the fact that it is hanging, if there's a breeze, anything that happens, it moves. You can't control that. The ink pieces is a lot less spontaneous, I would say. The spontaneous parts would be at the end when it comes together. If there's something I see that I don't like, I don't think it has a good flow to it, or it's missing, like on the far side there, it's missing one lighter green triangle. I need it to be there so it fills the space type thing. Yeah.
I like how you brought up your color palette's very colorful. Therefore, when I look at your black and white ink piece, I'm drawn to it. So I was wondering if you can elaborate why you chose to make it black and white.
I chose to make it black and white because India ink itself is black and white, or black, it's black ink. And I just like the extreme contrast within those and within the India ink. As I was going through the acrylic ink pieces, I didn't like the way they lacked a certain amount of contrast. And the black and white piece just solidifies that contrast for me. If that makes sense.
So on the step wall, there's certainly, I know that the centerpiece came from the contemporary class,
Mm-hmm.
and that one of these developed first critique, second critique this semester. So they certainly work together as an installation.
Yes.
And so I'm just wondering how much, like, you were forecasting, this is how I'm going to use these in the gallery. Did you intend, to have the 2 color ink pieces as diamonds that radiate or that have this sort of movement in one direction? Did you, with this plan?
Partially-ish. Originally, I had planned to have the black and white piece anywhere else in the gallery. In place of that piece was going to be Miranda's large painting piece. And I did play off of that idea with these last 2 because I wanted them to point to it, or like be like drawing your eye to the center of the room. And so in a way, yes, those 2 were planned to be there. The black and white ink piece was not. Are we good to go? Okay, then I'll give it to Ryan.
Hi, everyone. I also wanted to thank you all for coming as well, especially those of you who came late. I guess I'll start by giving a little backstory. So I came to college thinking I was going to do the 3-2 for architecture, dropped out of college, and then came back. And then when I came back, I was in hand-built ceramics. And that's kind of where my art really took off. I'd never really taken art before that in high school or anything. And so I felt like I was actually able to pick up on the concepts and the fundamentals of hand building, whereas, working 2-dimensionally, I've always felt like I kind of struggled. So after that, I started spending hours on the wheel trying to figure out, what I wanted to do. Did I want to do functional or did I want to do sculptural, and then I got into glaze chemistry and atmospheric firings. So most of my work in the show was made this semester, with the exception of this piece here, which is called Outreach, and that's actually what spawned the creation of the rest of these. I like to challenge myself, and so the concept of a hollow double-walled circle that's not necessarily functional, but also an incredibly difficult thing to throw. It gave me that challenge that I was looking for. The circle represents spirituality, cyclical motion, all of those kinds of things. And so I wanted to take that and work the concepts of mental health, or chaos or lack thereof. Just the mental and emotional health issues that I kind of struggle with day to day, and work those into my art. I'm not going to go through each of them, but Bound. A lot of people say a lot of different things about this one. My take on Bound is the fragility of masculinity, in the sense that when we think of what it means to be a man, a lot of times, when I was very young, I thought it meant things that should not be accepted in society. And so that was a way for me to kind of work through that and trap it so I could show just how fragile the piece was. Mine would be large, and then I actually started welding and decided that I wanted it to not be large, right? So I decided to weld the frame. The frame is 2 feet by 3 feet approximately. And I wanted to really just show how minuscule it can be if you let it, like how minuscule you could be if you let those feelings take control of you. Whereas like this one, I was kind of just having fun. I threw in a little donut base over the winter for like a Christmas gift, and I thought it was kind of fun. But then getting more into my glaze chemistry interest, this fall I got to go to a salt fire workshop where I was able to experience an atmospheric fire for the first time. And I'm not gonna lie, it spoiled me. After that I was like, I don't want to do oxidative firings. It's boring. So I started working on glazes, like layering glazes in special ways so that I could mimic that of a salt fire. So these all have the same glazes. They are all Jim's Juicy Fruit with a very thin down specific gravity, so it was almost more of an iron wash. And then it's layered with strontium crystal magic, and then a green and black where the thick gets black and the thin stays green. But I used, instead of dipping like I've been doing before, I used a spray gun, and the spray gun allowed me to control the flow of the glaze, the way that it was applied, angles, all of those different things. So I had a little more control within the kiln to force running or negate running, things like that. Tranquility Intention. So when we were talking about the show, we all kind of wanted to talk about different things. And so I thought it was really funny that my idea for this one was initially to hang it from the ceiling, and Rebecca also was hanging things from the ceiling. There's a big weight difference, and that's one of the things that I hadn't quite taken into account, right? So initially I was like, well, what the heck am I going to hang this with? Obviously not fishing line. I ended up having to go with game rope, because game rope was the sturdiest and most easily found thing. I wanted to go with like braided cable, like iron cable, but not workable. So yeah, that's pretty much all I've got for you. If you guys have questions, I'd love to answer them. In fact, probably more questions, because yeah. Yes, Charlie.
I noticed that a lot of your pieces go with like fragility in many senses. So I was wondering what piece made you, or what piece or pieces made you hold your breath when you put them in the kiln because you're worried they'd crack?
Yeah, all of them. But well, it was one of those things that in my process, I work to really push the limit of what the clay wants to do. I almost encourage cracking, because I feel like when you encourage those kinds of things, it doesn't break your heart as much when it comes out and there's like a giant crack across this. But yeah, no, this one, never truly whole. was really frustrating to both carve and put in the kiln. Because this was the first one where I had been carving away at the bases. So like I took that concept and pushed it to this. And so I had to wait until the clay was leather hard to really start punching out the holes with the brass that I was using. And then I had to figure out at the same time how it was going to stand. And so I had to have a base firming up at the same time that I was punching all of these holes. And what would be the right time to connect it to? And if I didn't connect it to, was it going to stand or was it going to fall apart? But it's really funny because now I can just kind of like, it is what it is. I encourage you to not do that. But I very carefully and delicately, when I'm placing things in kilns, just kind of to make sure that I don't break a leg off or I think overall the most stressful ones actually were these two. Because the other ones, like the flasks that are up on the wall, I already knew that they were going to be fine because I could just set them on their side. But anytime something has to stand up, vertically and really face any potential warping or, they're just so heavy that they could topple and just everything would fall apart. But then with like glazing, I wasn't that worried about it. The ones up there, and most of these I actually fired on their side. I used a similar technique to that of self-firing where I made wadding. I actually put clay wadding on the bottoms of the pots so that they stood instead of using stilts, because stilts don't like cone 6 repeatedly. They start to kind of bend. So that was kind of my way of working around those issues. Yes.
I want to ask, what did you learn from that first Amphora that you made, that's not in the show here, that you applied to that newer one that you made?
The biggest thing was with the first Fragility of Ego piece that I made. It's really heavy. In fact, the abdomen section was so thick that the abs actually blew off. So we had to shut the kiln down. And I had to work tirelessly to put paper clay and smooth it all back out. And surprisingly, miraculously, it survived. But this one, I felt much more comfortable hand building. And I felt more confident in my capability to work thinner and also push the textural and even like the definition and things like that. So I worked, the sculpture took about a week to get the entire piece built based on the firmness and allowing it to dry enough that I could move on. But then the biggest thing that I had to kind of work through was the thought of how was I going to actually push that thought again, but in a new way. And so I was looking at imagery of emaciated people and Arnold Schwarzenegger and all of these in-betweens, and really trying to force a relationship between the two. And so I think that was the most challenging thing, but I also learned a lot out of like working through those things that I hadn't thought about during the first one.
Ryan, you mentioned that at the beginning of your ceramic journey that you had this interest in functionality, but also sculpture and trying to find your way. So I see now you have functional work, you have sculptural work. Where do you see yourself in terms of that balance between the two?
Right now, as you know, I'm throwing 100 functional pieces to the software for the second one. And so I think that there's room for both. During the process of making these sculptures for the show, I was throwing bowls and cups for my infant study. And so I think that there's room for me to do both and explore both and kind of create a correlation between the two and see what relationships I can come up with.
Yeah, my question was kind of similar to Janice's about the, you know, when you start as a functional potter and you know, that can be such a passionate thing, you know, of creating functional ware. And then when you move into the sculptural thing, you know, it becomes something different. And the sculptural pieces, just knowing your work and having talked to you quite a bit about it, I know have more kind of conceptual meaning. Do you, I mean, has there not been any struggle between the two? You know, like, it's like a psychological struggle, like, these were my kids, these little, you know, these useful pots, and now I'm gonna make these sculpture things, and, I mean, like,
Yeah,
I don't know.
I think it's kind of a cyclical thing for me as well, in the sense that like, there are days where I feel absolutely worthless. So I come in and I make things that are functional because I need to make something that has purpose and has meaning, to help me through the issues that I'm dealing with where I feel like I don't have a purpose or a meaning. Whereas there are days where I come in and I'm like, okay, I feel like this, and I have these donuts that I've grown. I call them donuts. They're not edible, but they're donuts. You know, I have these donuts that I've thrown. So what am I gonna do? You know, what am I gonna do to show that this is how I'm feeling? And so I feel like, you know, I feel to an extent, I'll always have the need for functional wear. You know, I mean, that's my way of working through the issue. But at the same time, I like them equally. I think that they're both very validating to do and very gratifying, especially to see in this room.
You feel like the donut has more room to grow?
For sure. You know, standing here looking at these, I'm saying like 10 different ways that I could do that one. So.
Great.
Thank you so much, guys.
That's a great show. I'm glad you guys came out. Just a reminder, there is food outside. You guys can hang around here, talk to the artists. There's food outdoors. I don't know the rules for eating outside. I have no idea. So